Hello and welcome to episode 151 of the Ego Chall Podcast. My name is Preston Byers, and as always, I'm with my co-host Justin Binkowski. And on today's episode, PRED's back. That's pretty much the biggest story in competitive Call of Duty since the first major ended. So we will get into all of that. We also have confirmation about Hicksy's departure from the Vancouver Surge, and then we will complete our Major 1 recap and talk about the last few teams that we haven't really discussed over the past two episodes. But before we get to any of that, how are you doing, Bink?
Yeah, doing all right. For those in the U.S. or really, I guess anywhere who cares about it, happy Super Bowl Sunday. Um, for those not in the live show, it'll already be over, and hopefully, we're celebrating a Chiefs three-peat over Philadelphia winning because I despise Philadelphia. But it is what it is. Hopefully, it's a good game either way. And yeah, we do have some interesting COD stuff to still go over. The majors, the gift that keeps on giving, and now this PRED situation is finally come full circle. So excited to dive all right into it.
Yeah, before we went on the air, I was saying that it was about 2 months ago, almost today, or like it's been 2 complete months that this saga, if you want to call it that, started. PRED shockingly leaves OpTic or gets dropped, however it is phrased, but he parts ways with the team in December after just two of the first two CDL qualifying matches. And of course, this is the same team that won COD champs last summer. They, there was a pretty big shock and that they ended up doing that, but they win champs. They kind of get to the mountaintop, especially PRED, his first season with OpTic, and then two matches in, he's out. Huke is in, and now we talked about it a little bit. I think 2 episodes ago now. I think I just asked like, does the first major placing for OpTic? Obviously, they did not have the performance that they really wanted. But I asked, like, did it open the door for a roster change or PRED? Obviously, PRED has been looming, I think, for every team or every one of the competitive teams at least. And it did open the door. I don't know if OpTic makes this move if they win Major 1 or if they get really far. Maybe they get to the grand finals and lose at Major 1. But now here we are. Huke is out. PRED is in. PRED returns to the starting lineup and returns to OpTic after 2 months away. And Huke is now an unrestricted free agent after OpTic releases him. Your overall first thoughts? We'll get into it a little bit more, but you're the one that sent me the text message with like the PRED's outline and that kind of stirred the buzz. So what was your initial reaction to the news?
Yeah, I really was shocked. I think the way I've been, saying it on the podcast and previous episodes and all that has been like there's just so much uncertainty around this whole PRED situation. We really don't have all the details. So I was not expecting him to come back to OpTic. I mean, I still wasn't even sure if he was going to be playing again for the major two qualifiers, let alone on OpTic. And then for him to return to OpTic this short after it, I really wasn't expecting it. You know, I everything I think I kind of maybe talked myself into it a little bit more, but just like thinking about him going to Cloud9 made a lot of sense with just those pieces of Sid Mac and accuracy guys he won with on the Seattle Surge a couple years ago. Like it really made sense to me. I think I kind of talked myself into believing that's what was going to happen. But again, at the end of the day, we didn't know all the details of everything going on behind the scenes, and it nothing we had ever saw really made it seem like it was like an uh you know a, a, a bad breakup, for lack of a better term, there between PRED and OpTic and the teammates. And nothing we had seen really made it seem like it was you know unable for it was unrealistic for them to ever team again or anything like that. And I think there was a clip I put in our notes of Scump reacting to the news. And I think that's the best way of thinking about it. Really, like, feel bad for Hook. Hook played really well for OpTic. There were several maps where he just absolutely popped off. I can remember several hard points just going over him where he had like absurd score lines of over a 2 KD, and he really did play well, and he was one of the best players in challengers. Got an opportunity to come back into the league with OpTic in an emergency situation that nobody saw coming at that time either. And he really showcased what he's capable of and showcased he belongs in the CDL. So obviously this PRED's return comes at his expense, and I do feel bad for Huke, but I do think at the same time he should get another opportunity in the CDL very quickly. Haven't I don't think we've heard any reports or rumors on that at this particular moment, but I would be very surprised if he's not picked up very soon, at least before Major 2 comes around. It just it'd be a different story if Huke didn't perform. But he played so well that there are several teams that could benefit from him joining, because it's very obvious, especially with his early success in challengers, even before OpTic. He was just like, this game suits him and his play style. He's good at it. He was ahead of the curve in the challenger scene, and it just makes a ton of sense for him to get a shot. So I do feel for Huke, but at the same time, Scump even mentioned it, like this team of PRED, Shotzi, Kenny, and Dashi, they are the defending world champions and won COD champs last year. So it makes sense for them to reunite if it is feasible, and obviously PRED's back, so it is feasible. So it will be interesting to see what the chemistry is like, all that stuff. Going to be a tough first match for them in their return to action with them playing Atlanta FaZe, so that's going to be they're thrown right into the fire right away with PRED back in the mix, and will be interesting to see how those two teams stack up against one another right away. But yeah, I'm going to be looking at obviously we only get limited listen-ins and that sort of thing from a communications perspective. OpTic does, and I think JP does post some videos of like breaking down comms and stuff. So I will be interested in seeing what the communication sounds like between the boys, and seeing how the chemistry stacks up for saying that they won champs together. They also do have a last place finish together as a team. So I think it's important that we see how the boys are vibing and gelling together and all that stuff. And I will be interested to see just if there are any extremely noticeable differences between the gameplay we saw from them really in the qualifiers versus in these upcoming qualifiers, just because like we talked about it on the episode where we broke down Major 1 for OpTic, like 1 and 5 in hardpoint at the Major just isn't what you expect from this OpTic team, whether they have Huke or PRED in the lineup. So I can see that being part of the narrative. Like PRED comes in and OpTic's better at hardpoint. And they're like, oh, they're such a better hardpoint team now. But it's like they were a good hardpoint team even with Huke. It just didn't translate at the actual Major. So that's one thing I think is important to keep in mind with this, and I'm going to be mindful of as well when analyzing the gameplay and everything. So I'm more interested in hearing the comms, what we're able to hear at least, and go from there.
Yeah, we don't really know what to expect with PRED in this game, really, because we've only seen 2 official matches. Of course, they lose that first match to the Boston Breach, and I think then they just mollywopped Cloud9, if I'm not mistaken, in their second match, and then he's gone, and then it's basically been Huke since then. So I'm really interested just to, I don't know, like, what does this team even look like with PRED, and how do they adjust, or how long will it take them to adjust to PRED being in there instead of Huke? I agree with you, and what Scump said as well, where it's kind of an easy decision based on just the talent involved here. Like PRED is, what we've seen over the past 3 or 4 years, he's one of the best players in the world, and him on this team makes OpTic's ceiling higher than if Huke is on that team. And that's no disrespect to Huke. He's obviously a very talented player, and like you said, he should get picked up by another CDL team. Cloud9 would kind of make sense. Like just try to fit him in to that roster to see if you can maybe fix some things. I also saw people saying Vancouver. I just don't know if that. I don't know what the ceiling is for Vancouver versus Cloud9. I would imagine C9 is a little bit higher. But back to PRED and OpTic, this team has a championship level caliber. They have that ceiling where they can win another world championship. It's going to be difficult because Atlanta has the same ceiling. LAT has the same ceiling. We'll see what happens with Cloud9 and what happens with Toronto, whether they have that ceiling. But, man, it sucks for Huke. It is just the absolute worst. This is the second time OpTic has dropped him, I think. But he's also been traded by Dallas, the Empire. He's been traded by, I think he was dropped by LAT. He's been traded by LAG, and he's been dropped by the Surge as well. I think that's it. I don't know if there's any other teams I'm missing in that, in that like CDL era, but it's been a really rough road for him, and I'm glad that he actually has an opportunity. It looks like, or I would suspect that he does, to continue on in the CDL, because that wasn't the case really the last time he was in the CDL. It looked like, you're really going to have to earn your way back, and he did, and it, ended up being an OpTic, and I think that was a great opportunity for him. But man, it sucks that really one bad major. Like I said at the top of the show, I had absolutely no idea if they would have made this same move if they won. And they were the number one seed going into Major 1. So there was, at least a likelihood. I don't know if they were the favorite necessarily, but they were one of the favorites. And them crashing out of the major like they did, losing to Miami like they did, obviously that's unacceptable for a championship level team. And Huke, I guess, paid the price. But I asked this before we went on the show. Do you think that they're going to talk about the PRED thing and like why he left the team, or just explaining it a little bit more? Because obviously he had that stream, and I remember watching it, and I was like, man, this is really vague. And vagueness kind of leads to conspiracy theories, which there were already, those were already a part of it. But it definitely did not really clear up a lot. Like the only thing he really cleared up, or that he claimed, I guess, was that he did not bet on CDL matches. That was pretty much the only thing that he definitively said. And I think that not that they necessarily need to, but it does seem odd that a player basically takes a 2-month sabbatical from the championship defending team and there's really nothing said. So do you think they're going to talk about this at all?
I don't know how in depth they're gonna get, but I feel like it's like kind of just something that's gonna be looming if it's never addressed. And I think I said it to you before we went live, like that at least um for I don't watch a ton of OpTic content, but I'm pretty sure they still do it where it's like just the 4 players on the team and 2 and 2 got mics in front of them and it's like a podcast show. Um I think they'll probably just do some episode of that where they talk about it very briefly. Don't know how in depth we'll go or anything like that. I did see some stuff on Twitter about like something about like a formal saying on stream and other people saying like this was all Shotzi, and then like Zuma addressed it and saying like you can't put it all on Shotzi, even if it was on Shotzi. Like you make a roster change on it like this, it's a multiple people are involved in it, and obviously for a team like OpTic, you gotta assume Hex had a major say in pulling the trigger, even if it wasn't like his idea, because we obviously know from the past like the whole Dashy versus Rambo thing. Like I'm pretty sure I don't know if we ever got official confirmation, but I think it was at least reported that it was like Hex stepping in was like, no, we're not getting rid of Dashy, and then that led to obviously Rambo being the one that moved on from OpTic and no Vancouver. So I just think this whole situation is just like if it is never addressed, there are always going to be Greenwall fans and just competitive Call of Duty fans who are wondering what the hell is going on. So I think it's just better. The easiest route is to just give some sort of vague statement or just address it very briefly on like a video or something, and then that's the end of it. Um, do I think they'll do it? They don't have to, so I don't know, but I think that's most likely what we will get in some shape or form. Um, so yeah, and I mean, I would love for them to be super transparent and give us a ton of details about everything that's happened in the situation. I just don't think that's very likely.
Yeah, and Shotzi, he said, I think this is in Pred's Twitch chat, so I think this might have been like one of Pred's first streams back, and Shotzi was in the chat. He said, but this thing where I made the move needs to stop. That's not how that shit was.
Yeah,
Shit's cringe. And then he said that he's not streaming for a while. I I mean, I don't really care all that much because I know people get really into that Shotzi and Huke are like friends, and obviously they kind of came up together and they played on the Empire 5 years ago now. Like, I don't really care about any of that. It doesn't really matter to me. It does matter to some people, and I think there are a lot of Huke fans, or at least a lot of people really sympathetic to him, and I'm sympathetic, to the idea that he's getting dropped for really, like, it's a team performance, not an individual performance, obviously. But like, I don't think Shotzi was unaware of him getting dropped. I would highly doubt that. That being said, like, it very well could be a thing where it's kind of like a team vote. Like, it didn't necessarily need to be unanimous for Hook to get dropped, but maybe everybody else was like, yeah, I'd rather have Pred here, and I'd rather, what we talked about, like the championship ceiling goes up with Pred, and maybe even the floor as well. And maybe that was just the extent of it. We bring Pred in, we have a better chance at winning championships than if we have Hook. And we still have a good chance regardless, but still, like, we have a better chance. And that's really all that matters. I don't know, like, I think maybe he shouldn't have said anything. Like, that would have maybe been a better idea because people just aren't going to believe him anyway. Like, just because you say it doesn't necessarily mean that people are going to, just say, okay, like, he's just telling the truth. Like, I just don't see the benefit in even talking about it. But I thought it was interesting that he mentioned it at all. And maybe it's just because that is kind of like a talking point, is like, how could you drop your friend? But I mean, that's just like, isn't that competitive COD and kind of like sports in a nutshell? Like, you can't always just stick by your friends, especially when, it's such a big part of it. Like, you're trying to win. Like, they're not a bottom tier team. Like, they have a real chance to go back to back and be the first team ever to win back to back championships. So, like, I think they should take that seriously and go for the better option, even if it is going to hurt a friend, or, maybe it doesn't benefit a friend.
I think there was a Zuma clip I saw too where he's like, people talking about the COD competitive community are like always willing to say friendship league, and then when something like this happens where potentially a
Yeah, it
friend
goes against
is
that.
making a move, so yeah, it's like just the seesaw. One time you're all about the friendship league, the other time it's like, oh, backstabbing people, yada yada. So um I don't know. End of the day, I do think it's just overall it's in probably everyone's interest there, at least for clarity, that we get some sort of response or just this addressed in some form, so it's just out there, and then we have a little bit more details, but we'll have to wait and see on that. um One other thing I was thinking while you were just talking there, though, is like from Hoop's perspective. Wow, Hoop's perspective. um like everything we know, Hook's a smart kid. He's not a dumb kid. Like, realistically, even if he didn't know like all the details around what was going on with Pred and stuff, you had to realistically think that this was a possibility when he decided to join the team, right? Like, there's no way he went into this thinking, oh yeah, there's no shot Pred is ever coming back,
Yeah.
unless he was told something like that. Again, we don't know for sure, but I gotta feel like at least like part of him knew this was possible. um and at the same time, this even if that is a possibility, he got an opportunity to play on a really good team, whereas everyone was talking about him being one of the top players in challengers to get picked up. He could have been picked up by a bottom of the barrel team and just got a really bad placing at the event, and even if he played well, he still could be in this position where he gets dropped after major one,
Yeah, it's true.
and then he's back in challengers again. So I don't know, it's weird. But another component of it that you got me thinking too, I don't know how likely it is right now, but before Shotzi was the golden boy of the Dallas Empires, Huke really was that golden boy of Team Envy and Hastro, and he was a part of Envy. Was a part of Envy Halo, if I remember correctly, and was a part
Yep.
of the Envy team when uh, he was able to compete again in Call of Duty, 5v5 in Call of Duty, then CDL, Dallas Empire team. He's part of that. With Envy's return as a brand, I don't know how much Hastro will care about competing in challengers, but in a worst case scenario where Huke doesn't get a CDL offer here ahead of Major 2, I could see him, Envy, potentially forming a roster around him. I don't think that's super likely because I just don't think Hastro is gonna want to be competing in challengers. He wants to compete in the big leagues as far as I would know, but who knows? Maybe it's a possibility. And I think at the very least, if Envy/Empire is able to return to the CDL next year, the possibility of Huke and Illy or just Huke being reunited and competing under that brand again seems very likely and would be an interesting building block to like start your team around. If that's what actually ends up happening. A lot of ifs involved in all that, but I just you brought up Dallas and it got me thinking a little bit.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing to think about, and because we really just don't know the extent of Envy's involvement in esports moving forward and what they'll end up doing. I saw that their Twitter account came back, I think earlier this week or maybe late last week. So I saw like somebody tweeting off
They
of the NBA account, but
Yeah, they just signed a Valorant roster. I think it's not on the official account, so maybe it was a report I saw. There was the Apex World Championship going on in Japan, I believe, and I know I saw Hastro tweeting about it, so I'm pretty sure. Um, yeah, they had a team competing in the Apex World Championship under Envy, and then I saw some report about them potentially having a Valorant roster. So like things could be moving, but again, I just don't know how likely they are to compete in Challenger. It'd be very different if there was an open CDL spot or something like that. I think Hastro would be first in line to try and grab that if it was possible, but we'll have to wait and see.
yeah. I don't think there's really anything else we can say about the optic stuff, unless you can think of an angle that we haven't already covered. But what I think about now is with Pred off of the market, which was one of our big talking points. I think we mentioned his name literally like maybe every episode basically, since he left Optic in December. But with him off of the market, how does that change some of the other teams around the league? And I think we obviously we've been talking about it. Cloud9 seemed like the most logical fit. If Optic was like out of the running, or like we didn't even know if that was a possibility, because we don't really know the dynamics within the team and all of that. So C9 seemed like, okay, that would seem like a really logical fit for Pred. He has all these guys that he played with and he knows really well. It would seem like a pretty seamless fit in terms of like culture, so to speak. Now Cloud9 doesn't have that option. They can't just say, okay, let's go to Pred and we're going to be all right because we have one of the best players in the world. Is it a Huke situation, or is there anybody else out there for C9 now to kind of help this roster, or are they just kind of stuck with what they have? Which I'm not saying that as a bad thing. It's just this roster has a lot of talent on paper, but it hasn't actually translated over to the game. So where do you think Cloud9 is now that Pred is not an option?
I don't think Cloud9 will make a move. I think in a world where Pred was available to them, it made sense for Pred to replace Kremp, but that necessarily wasn't like suggesting that Kremp was playing poorly or playing at a level where he needs to be replaced. It just would have been a case of uh pack a punching, as Aches usually likes to say when referring to roster moves and stuff like that. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean Kremp's playing bad, but if you can improve with a better talent on paper, and that's just like anybody's gonna tell you PRED is a better player than Kremp, at least based on what we've seen so far. Like, no offense to Kremp, it's just it is what it is. Um, that's when I think you make a move. But now, like, I think the big thing, and we'll get into C9 a little bit too, because we still haven't talked about their major performance, but they won a match at the major, won a match on land, and they kind of, it's only one match really, but I think at least in my eyes, that's like kind of an indicator of they had some online issues earlier in the year. It's not, we can kind of look past those and be like, this team is going to be more competitive on LAN if they aren't dealing with those online issues. And Sib in particular played really well. I think he had the fifth highest KD at the event. Again, small sample size because they didn't make a long run in the bracket, but Sid played better than he did online. I don't think that's up for debate really. So yeah, I don't know if there's just like one singular move that Cloud9 makes now that would really improve the squad. I think they kind of just got to put the Major One qualifiers and Major One itself in the rearview mirror and try and pick up some wins so that they're not in the loser bracket right away. And obviously, if the online / ping server issues rear their ugly heads again, then they're back at square one, and we'll have to talk about that if that actually happens. But I think this team has too much talent on it to, just call it quits this quick. I guess there is a possibility that they could look at someone like Huke, but I don't know if it makes a ton of sense because again, like I don't feel like there's just one player in particular who is severely underperforming, let alone like one sub, because I think Mac has played pretty well, all things considered, with his break and everything too. And I think Huke is a better player than Kremp, just like, again, former world champion. Like, I don't think that's an outlandish statement to make. But, Kremp was always, in any situation where we were talking about PRED potentially going to Cloud9, Kremp was kind of going to be like that odd man out and the scapegoat. So it feels like that's who they would be talking about replacing, unless they're making some drastic move where Attach is being replaced, because it doesn't feel like Sib is going to go anywhere, and it doesn't feel like if they were confident enough to bring Mac in after his little competitive hiatus and he's played the way he has played, it doesn't feel like he's going to go anywhere. So I don't know, just it feels like, to me at least, I don't think C9 is going to make a move. But again, I didn't expect this PRED thing to go down the way it did too. And I said on the last episode or 2 episodes ago, like, one domino falls and it can cause something else to happen. So like now this domino is falling where PRED is picked up by OpTic again. Huke is available. If Huke signs on to some CDL team that's unexpected and somebody else is dropped, then another team can make a move for that drop player, and the dominoes continue to fall. So it could be interesting. Could throw, you know, just throw something unexpected in there, throw a curveball into the mix. But yeah, I'm not expecting a C9 move at this time, barring something I just don't see right now.
One team we are expecting, or we know that will make a move other than OpTic, is the Vancouver Surge. They officially released Hicksy this week. We had talked about it on the last episode. There was the report that they were going to release him, or it was very likely that they were going to do so, and that they had targeted Afro and Neptune as potential replacements for Hicksy in their lineup. But Hicksy, on February 6th, the Surge announced his release, which I think you floated like the idea of like maybe he stays on as a sub, even though we both knew like that was unlikely just because nobody ever does that anymore. Like I think like Miami is like one of the only teams that has like actually tried to have subs, and like obviously Vegas, but they're kind of a different beast as well. But Hicksy is gone from the Surge, and it seems like that Neptune will be the choice to replace him. Ronnie Intel, formerly CDL Scrim Intel, he tweeted on the 7th, so a day after Hicksy's release, he said, Vancouver Surge are signing omit player Neptune after his impressive start to the Challenger season. The team decided last night between Neptune, Afro, and Huke. So that, that's interesting that Huke was, reportedly a part of this. And then Abuza replied to that tweet and said, WTF are you saying, brother? And so, you never really know, but I think it seemed, at least from the reporting, it was between Neptune and Afro, and then Huke obviously being a free agent, it was like you can't ignore it, especially because he was with the Surge last season. He knows some of these players. He played with them. Obviously, he knows Rambo, I'm sure, pretty well, and it seems like it would be a fit. Are you surprised that Neptune is the reported choice over Afro, who you said would make quite a bit of sense on the last episode, and then obviously Huke, who has the history and the pedigree that doesn't really need to be said?
Yeah, that's what really, I mean, you kind of took the words out of my mouth, but like the way this whole thing has shaken out in the public eye, at least, is we had the initial report of Hicksy being replaced by the Surge, potentially Afro and Neptune as candidates. Then on the same day that PRED replaces Huke, Hicksy is officially released. So that has to at least get the wheels turning a little bit in your mind, that if you're thinking about it analytically and just like, okay, they Vancouver hasn't made an official move yet. Huke is now available. Huke, as you said, played for that team with 04 and Abuza at the end of last year. That at least has to be considered as an option. And I think at the end of the day, like you said, the history with Rambo and stuff, it would have made, if you told me right now Huke is going to Vancouver, it makes a ton of sense for me because of that past experience and everything. But at the same time, that team last year just it didn't work out well. Obviously, Brezzy was their fourth at the end of last year, and right now it would be nasty, so it would be different in that sense. But you would be basically making a move to kind of go backwards in a sense, just because it's almost going back to the same squad that didn't hoist a trophy in the previous year, didn't, and again, that was Abuza's rookie year, 04's first half of a rookie year. So a lot of things have changed, and, maybe it could have worked out a second time around. But at the end of the day, I'm not surprised either that it potentially isn't going to Huke, just because of the way this all shook out. They being Vancouver most likely had to consider their options before knowing that Huke was actually available, because it's even in the clip of Scump reacting to it. Scump said he heard it was possible, but he wasn't even sure it was totally going to happen on that day when the news broke. So if Scump didn't know, assuming he's being honest and genuine and saying that, which he would have no reason to not be, there's no way Vancouver knew, or any of the other teams knew, if Scump wasn't even 100% sure that the Huke switch was coming in. So you got to think Vancouver was most likely weighing their options, not realizing that Huke was potentially available. I am just surprised. I think, again, we don't know for sure. All we know officially is Hicksy has been released, so Surge is looking for one right now. We do know that Omit, the team that Neptune was previously on in Challengers, has picked up Capsidal to continue competing in Challengers, which makes it believable that Neptune was picked up by Vancouver. We just don't know that for sure. I mean, it's in the world of Challengers, it's possible Neptune just left that team and went to another Challengers team. So we don't know for sure, but it seems like all signs right now indicate Neptune to Vancouver, which will be interesting to see how it works out, because like you said too, I did think of the initial report of Afro versus Neptune. I like Neptune as a player, thought he was the exciting prospect when he was first making his come up, but I just thought that Afro and Nasty previous connection and the way Afro's been playing in Challengers, I thought that move just made a little bit more sense from a chemistry perspective. But we'll have to see how it all shakes out. And obviously Neptune can be a really good player, so this is another opportunity for him to showcase what he's capable of if it comes to fruition.
Yeah, like you were saying with Huke being with the Surge last season, so he was a part of the initial roster, obviously, and then they had their roster shakeup about mid-season. They bring in 04 for Arcides. Obviously, Illy gets benched. I think after Major 1, and that started a bunch of stuff. But the final roster that they had, like you mentioned, was Abuza, Huke, Brezzy, and 04. Obviously, 04 and Abuza is still there. Brezzy is obviously not. That team got 7th at the Major 3 qualifiers. Then they got top 6 at Major 3. Then they got 3rd in the Major 4 qualifiers, got top 6 at Major 4. And then they finished the regular season in 5th place, like overall standings. They got top 8 at Champs, which is, last because there's only 8 teams that get to Champs. And then they got top 4 at ESWC. So there's that. Like, obviously that was their best result of the season, as far as I see. And but it's still like you said, it was underwhelming. Like, it wasn't anything to write home about necessarily for their results. It just maybe the only explanation is like, you think that Nasty is a much better player than Brezzy, or just like maybe Huke is, in this game is a much better player than he was last season. I don't know. Like, there's that would be the only explanation, I guess, for why you would go back to Huke. But I mean, obviously Huke was a top challengers player to start the season. He was just on OpTic, so there are reasons to go to him if that would be the case. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Vancouver. Like you said, it's not confirmed yet, so we're not entirely sure if Neptune will be the guy. It's just looking like that at the moment. Let's talk about some of these teams though, because we talked about 8 of the teams, and I think we've mentioned here or there some of these teams already. Let's talk about Cloud9 because they've already been mentioned on this show. PRED no longer an option, if he ever was, I guess. But they still need a lot of help, or just need to improve their gameplay, because this is a team that I think we all expected to at least be like top 6. I think that was kind of like the bar for them, with all the talent that they had. Yeah, they're not the New York Subliners of past, where they're world championship caliber teams, and obviously a world championship roster formerly. But they have talent that should be competing with FaZe and LAT and OpTic and so on and so forth. They just haven't been that this season. And I'm not entirely sure why. Roster change aside, because you said you don't think that they're going to make a change, or not sure what change they could make to upgrade this roster necessarily. Where does Cloud9 go from here, though? Do they, like, what has to change, I guess, for them moving forward, for them to get out of this like kind of bottom 4 spot that they're in right now?
I mean, no, we've joked about it and seriously talked about it. I think right now I'm somewhat in between with my following statement, but these upcoming online matches are really going to be a huge deal for Cloud9. And I know, like I said, somewhere in the middle between joking and being serious right now. Like, I mentioned it very early on when the whole like situation was said that the team was going to be competing from California. We've heard about it historically in the online era of the CDL, how much of a disadvantage that puts some teams at. If that continues to be an issue, there has to be some solution where Cloud9 or just attaches the de facto captain, if he's not the actual captain of the team, comes forward and goes to C9 and be like well, we gotta like rent an apartment in Dallas or something, or just go somewhere else to compete, because we are literally going to continue to be at a disadvantage if we keep competing from California and having these issues. So my eyes are on that, at least. That's really all you can look at, because we have the online qualifiers coming up. But I do think just what we saw over the last few qualifiers and at LAN just indicates this team is capable of being that, like, gatekeeper of the middle of the pack, for lack of a better term there. Like, they're capable of being in that 4th, 5th, 6th range if things are actually going their way. And I think the reason you can make that statement is because they beat Boston in their match that they played in the loser bracket. It was a 3-2 series. I can scroll and look at the actual series to see the breakdown. That would have been on Friday. So Boston did win both hard points, and C9 pulled off a Neslo. But I mean, just end of the day, like Boston's a whole other conversation. It's tough to take too much into just one series on land, but I do think for this Cloud9 team, it was an important win to like show like that we know what we're capable of, and we know we can beat a team. Like people were talking about Boston as a potential top 4 team heading into this event, and so it wasn't a win against Vegas Falcons and then Cloud9 loses the next round after that. It was a win against a team that, despite what some people think about Boston and not, like it has to have some value, even if it's not the most. So, I don't know. They lose to Rocker after that, and it's like Rocker's been this team that has been able to go on runs and has been able to cause upsets no matter how you look at where you rank them and stuff and where you thought they were heading into the season and all that. So it's again very small sample size for Cloud9 even on land, but I think it's a step in the right direction. And I mean, if you tell me tomorrow they're making a roster move, I'd probably be surprised if it's just a 1-person change. If they made a 2-person change, I don't know who those 2 players are and who's being replaced. But I think that honestly, a 2-person change would make more sense than a 1-person change. I don't see, I see 0 people being changed right now for this roster, and they go from here and see what they're capable of. But the online qualifiers coming up are just going to be extremely important for them because they don't want to. This is a team that they don't want to be facing another, 2-5 record or whatever they had in the qualifier starting right away in the loser bracket. Like they're a team that you expect to be in the top 8 starting in the winners bracket, and then can potentially make some magic happen from there. So I definitely am going to be a little more attentive of just Cloud9. I just want to see what's going on in the qualifiers, if it's really a case of them improving since those early struggles, or if it's, back to square one with online issues and stuff. That's obviously different than actual performance, but it's a factor for this team, so it has to be addressed, I feel like.
My thing with, so you were talking about how they lost both of the hard points against Boston, and they lose both of the hard points against Minnesota as well. Obviously, like you said, really small sample size. So there's not really, you can't definitively say like this is a complete change in how Cloud9 is operating online versus on land. But I looked at thank you to Breaking Point. Like they make it so easy to pull up, like you can like deselect matches that you don't want to count, and then it gives you like the totals of like hard point win loss, S&D win loss, etc. So online, which is pretty much everything before Major 1, Cloud9 was 8-7 in hardpoint, so a little bit above 500, and then they were 5-8 in S&D and 2-7 in control. So obviously not great in 2 of those 3 game modes. They won 2 controls online and 9 maps total online. At LAN, they won 2 controls, so they went 2-0 on LAN, 2-7 online, and S&D they went 2-1 on LAN. They were 5-8 online, like, and then they go 0-4 in hardpoint. I just don't know what to really make of that. I don't necessarily think of Minnesota and Boston as like hardpoint dominant teams necessarily. I don't. I granted they still beat Boston, so it's kind of a moot point in that regard. But still, like the fact that they went 0-4 in hardpoint, it just seems weird. And the fact that they won 2 controls after winning that many through like 7 weeks of online matches also seems weird to me. But I don't know, like maybe this is just Cloud9 being inconsistent, which is kind of a calling card for bad teams typically. Even if like I mean, maybe they're just bad. Like maybe they're just not a team that fits together at this point or in this game, because the players themselves are talented. I don't think any of us, or I don't think the community would necessarily debate that. But the fact that they can't consistently string wins together, even against teams that aren't like the very top, I think that's pretty alarming, right? Like that, if they couldn't beat Atlanta or LAT or OpTic, okay, like that's not the biggest deal in the world. We saw that with good teams in the past. Atlanta had a really bad losing streak against OpTic. OpTic's had losing streaks against Atlanta. That happens. But the fact that they're kind of inconsistent and they can't beat any of these teams like consistently, other than Vegas probably, I think that's pretty bad. And it doesn't bode well for the future. I'm not sure exactly what to do about this team. What Tupac said, they're pretty much idiots in S&D. He just like tweeted that one day after I forget what the context of that was,
Yeah.
but he basically was like, yeah, they don't listen, or they don't know what they're doing in S&D. That's not great. Not something you necessarily want to hear from one of your assistant coaches. They're just a lot worse than I imagined them, at least at this point. Maybe they can turn it around, but it does seem like a roster change would be coming at this point, especially for a team that had higher expectations than this. Obviously, they're, I think, 10th in the league, if I'm not mistaken, or something around there. Either way, like they were supposed to be a lot higher up in the standings, and they're just not. And I think that's pretty surprising for how much talent is on this roster.
I just think it's like we can obviously sit here and you can make arguments for almost any team to on paper make a roster team if it's not the team that won the championship in the previous event, right? When there aren't specific names that make sense, like in the Vancouver scenario, we knew Hicksy, there was the stats to back up. He was like 49th out of 52 KDs or whatever in respawn. And it's like we got two subs in Afro and Neptune who are both playing really well in challengers and EU challengers and NA challengers. Like having these specific names attached to it there makes the conversation a little more interesting to me. But like just sitting here saying like, yeah, Cloud9 can make a roster change, but I'm saying I don't really know. You didn't say any specific names either of the like people who come in and can replace him outside of like PRED, because again, that's the whole thing. And even Huke to some extent. Like I don't know, just not having the names attached to it makes it a little tough, because like we can sit here and just say I know one name is like Lunars and challengers for an AR. Like you say like Lunars for attach. Like how much does that really change? You're bringing in a rookie for just a guy who is super well liked in the league, and obviously that doesn't necessarily mean a lot, but it's like he's that veteran presence on the team and the leader. And obviously they have the coach and accuracy. It's first year coaching, but we know that's kind of like that was his role as a player in his later years, was that vocal leader for a team that had Sid, Mac, and Pred on it. So I don't know. It's just unless we start hearing some reports of stuff for Cloud9, it's really going to be tough for me to envision them making a move at this point. I do think, though, regardless of like online issues or not creeping up, if they underperform during the Major 2 qualifiers or Major 2 itself, I think then it would be inevitable that somebody like they have to make some move. And that's where like even a guy like Attach or Sib could be on the chopping block in my eyes if they continue to struggle beyond this next set of majors, because then we're at the halfway point of the season and it's do or die.
Yeah, so I don't think this is the case for New York or what they should do or anything, but this kind of conversation where you're saying like neither one of us have like a name on the tip of our tongue. It was like this would be the solution to Cloud9's problems. This made me think of an exchange I saw on Twitter this week. It was between Clay and Fellow, obviously good buddies, I think, old friends. So they were basically talking, and because Fellow was essentially saying like Neptune is leaving, and they played together in challengers and how they pretty much dominated challengers to a certain extent. And he's like the end of a historical run, RIP. And Clay responded, said the curse of being good in challengers. I think it's absolutely abysmal. Prove yourself again and again just to get your teammates snatched. And I mean, like, and then Glacier later on said something to the effect of like, eventually these GMs should, in theory, just pick up an entire team versus pick the best player. Obviously, Neptune is kind of an example of that. If he is to be picked up by Vancouver, he is on a great challengers team, or what seems to be a great challengers team, a team that is doing very well at that level together. Now you're taking one part of that team and then you're placing it within your own team, and you're hoping that his success in challengers with a completely different set of players will hopefully have a similar effect on your new set of players, on these 3 players that you already have on your roster. The reason I brought this up is, when will we get to the point where these teams in the CDL say, screw it, we made a mistake by picking up these 4 players in the CDL right now, and we're going to make the drastic move, which honestly is more realistic right now, or like in this like no minimum era. Like, it's more realistic to do this now than it has been in the past. But we made a mistake. We're going to get rid of these 4 guys, and we're going to pick up a challengers roster. The only time that something similar, I think, has happened, at least from my memory, is the LAG thing, where they picked up 3/4 of the team that beat them at the Pro-Am. That was like 22, I think, 23. But they picked up a team that had beaten them at the Pro-Am. They performed, pretty well. That was like Assault. I think Diamond Con was maybe the player that got left behind, something to that effect. And so they got brought up. They didn't perform great, but it certainly wasn't, it wasn't going to be a great performance for LAG at that time. That's the only thing that I can think of where something similar has happened, where a GM has said, like, we're essentially going to bring up a challengers roster to compete. And I think it's an interesting scenario. It's not going to happen very many times, if ever, really, because it takes a GM or a coach or whoever constructs these rosters to basically say, I screwed up, or we screwed up, and we have to make drastic changes to fix whatever is wrong here. I don't know if you had any thoughts on that, or what you thought of that idea of, like, we have a proven success model here. Let's just bring it up to the big league. Maybe it could work out here, rather than pick out 1, 2, even 3 players and bring them to the CDL roster.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, and the first thing that came to mind while you were talking there was LAG during that MW2 season. So it's kind of funny because it involves some names that we were already talking about. The roster to start that year was Arcity, Spart, Neptune, and Huke. We've talked about Huke and Neptune, and you even talked last episode about Spartan Arcity signing like those 3-year deals or whatever the contracts were at that
the
time.
2+1s.
And then they go to that major 1 event, and did they actually play at the event? I know they outplaced them, but I'm not sure.
I thought they played them, but maybe I'm just
regardless. The LAG Academy outplaced the LAG main roster. LAG, or no, they got the same. They both came 9th, 12th, so maybe they did play them. I'm not seeing it in the group play in the finals.
Maybe they just beat a CDL team, and maybe it was something along those lines.
The LAG Academy beat London.
Yeah, so that might have been that
in group play. So they got the same placing, at least. They both made it to the losers qualification map, because it was that what's that called, where it's the GSL,
the Swiss format, where you basically play a team that has the same record as you, right?
No, it was the mini groups, where it's like a double elimination bracket in a group stage. I think it's called GSL.
Yeah. Like that.
Yeah, 4 GSL groups of 4 teams each. So they both, LAG lost to Subliners, won the first bracket match of the losers bracket, then lost the qualification match in the losers bracket. LAG Academy went 3-2 against Atlanta FaZe. Then they beat London and they lost to Seattle Surge after that. So they both got a top 12 placing at that event. And it was after that event where they make the move. They keep Arcides and go with Assault, Exceed, and Joe Deceives, replacing Huke, Neptune, and Spark. So that is definitely, at least as far as I know, that's the closest we've come to like full on replacing a team with a challengers team. And I think at that point in, Arcidy's career and with the whole like 3-year contracts and everything like involved in it, like there was no way they were just full sale or full on replacing everyone involved after the financial commitment they make there. And I think that's probably the element of this that makes it very unlikely for a 4-man roster to just go into a team mid-season, because even like if we look at a team like Vancouver, like even if Vancouver was really struggling, they still have someone like Abuza who they think and the community thinks very highly of, and they're going to want to build around him, even if it's a full rebuild. You look at a team probably like Gentlemates, like even if they wanted to go full rebuild at this point with the whole French fandom and thing, like it seems like unless they just completely blow it up, which is I don't know if they're gonna do it at any point, but even if they decided to, it feels like they would still keep Lins, which is crazy to say because like the other 3 players are world champions and just 2 years ago. But for lack of a better example, like it would make sense if they didn't replace the whole squad and they wanted to keep a young up and coming player like Lins on and then have 3 players from challengers compete with him. So like I don't see I mean honestly the one thing that would make sense is if Vegas Falcons just decided to completely scrap the Saudi roster plans and bring in a challengers team. That really feels like the one opportunity for this to happen if it was going to happen. But I don't see how, when there's so many like details with contracts and the financials and all that, and even teams where it seems like potentially on paper it could happen, they have at least one guy they would want to continue building around. I just don't know how likely a full-on 4-man for 4-man swap is in today's landscape.
Yeah, it would take a unique situation, like you said, where there's not at least one player that feels like a part of the franchise or like a cornerstone necessarily. Like maybe the only current team that has that, maybe like obviously Vegas. Like I just don't, like obviously I don't think you're thinking this either, but like I just don't see it happening because they're committed to like a certain type of team.
Yes.
And so they don't want challengers. But like any other team, I'm thinking Minnesota probably because, and obviously they're performing well enough that it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
But say if they started off poorly, I don't think any of those 4 players have a connection to the rocker to such an extent that they couldn't be dropped. Maybe they think highly of Gio. Maybe they just say like, okay, like he's a young guy, so we're going to stick with him. But even then, I don't think like he's to that extent where they're going to stick by him regardless. But that was really the only like situation that I could see currently. But I just think it's an interesting idea, and it was something like I think I literally brought this up when the Paris Legion were around, where it's like this team absolutely sucks. Like just pick up a challengers team and just let them do what they're already doing.
I mean, even like we kind of glossed over it because I thought of LAG at first too. Even a team like Boston last year that was
just pick up a challengers
historically
team.
bad. They kept Snoopy and picked up 3 challengers players to go with Snoopy. Like if it was ever going to happen, last year's Boston team was a chance for it to happen, and they did it, before EWC. So, yeah, I mean, even again, that whole Boston situation is a little more in depth too, because it's very obvious now that they think highly of Snoopy and it's paying off for them. So far, at least in the first set of online qualifiers, it did. But I mean, even in that situation, like we didn't see a full sale, or I keep saying full sale, full on,
full sending.
Full send is what I'm thinking of. It's just a full rebuild of 4 players in for 4 players.
Yeah, and I just think it's an interesting idea because there aren't very many resources in challengers for these teams. And I'm not saying that some of these teams are giving them a ton of resources as is, but a coach, maybe an analyst, just something like some kind of structure. Like, we're just going to take your roster, whatever you're already doing, we know that is having success, albeit at a lower level than what we're going into, but you've had success, you're doing something right, or multiple things right. We're going to bring you up, and we want you to continue to do what you're doing, but we're going to try to give you as much support and help as we can. It's an interesting thought. It's kind of like an exercise, basically, because, like you said, I just don't see it happening. It would take a unique, really weird situation for it to happen, and it would take a coach or a GM that is open-minded about that kind of thing. I do think there are coaches and GMs that are more open-minded to challengers players and giving young, unproven players an opportunity, more so than others. But I thought it was interesting, thing that I saw on Twitter. And of course, Omit Brooklyn is the team that is in question right now because that's Neptune fellow Craze and Lunars, and they won the most recent elite stage, or like they won the first Challengers Elite Stage playoffs, and they're one of the best Challengers teams in the world right now. And of course, they didn't really get to show that because there wasn't a Challengers Open at Major 1, which is kind of sucks because that would be the perfect opportunity to showcase it to a more broad audience and for like teams to actually meet these players in person, which isn't something that probably happens very much. So, that's, we'll see what happens with Omit Brooklyn. It seems like they're just going to get picked apart like pretty much every other Challengers team. I think FC Black was like almost like a minor league team that one season where every week they had to find a new fourth, and that's just how it goes in Challengers. You mentioned Vegas, and we've talked about them a little bit. They obviously stink. Like that's, we know that, it's been known for a while now, but something that was brought up during the first major was something said on the Flank podcast, or I think it was just maybe Ben's podcast or Ben's stream or whatever. It was this idea that teams in the CDL are blacklisting, for lack of a better term, Vegas in scrims. They don't want to scrim them. There's, to a certain extent, I think they're not wrong. It's the same reason that some teams don't scrim certain Challengers teams. They don't think that they're giving them good enough practice. What are your thoughts on that? Because it's pretty rare to hear it said. Obviously, it's a second or third hand source, so it's not a team coming out and saying like, yeah, we're not scrimming them because they suck. But it does seem like that is the case now. What do you think about Vegas kind of being blacklisted by at least a few teams because they're just not up to the level of a regular CDL team?
Yeah, I think there's multiple ways to look at this, and I'm gonna try to, not flip flop as much as possible here because I really do think like you can look at it from multiple different angles, but like from a very basic perspective, like I understand the point of like these guys aren't going to help us get better if we scrim Vegas. So why would we waste time scrimming them? But in other years, there have been teams like we mentioned some of the Vegas Legion rosters, the Boston Breach team last year, who were bad as well. And we never heard this same, rhetoric or narrative around potentially
Yeah.
not scrimming them. So then it like it becomes a thing. And I understand this is a new project where it's an all Saudi team, and that's been one of the things we've talked about on the podcast. Like these guys haven't played against players of this caliber in North America that they're playing against in the CDL before, and it's going to take time for them to improve. So that's just part of the process, and I think you can say it's it's messed up, but I definitely do at least see the point of like thinking of it from like Atlanta FaZe or LA Thieves perspective. Like, what are we going to gain from scrimming Vegas Falcons? We are the teams from the grand finals of the last event. Like, you could make the argument that scrimming them could make us worse if we like start goofing off or having bad tendencies and stuff like that in scrims. You could at the same time make the argument that playing against a team like Vegas Falcons and Scrim would allow you to work on different things and work on, you know, some of the maps that you might not be as good at, or, you know, stuff like that. So this is what I'm saying. Like, I feel like it's a weird conversation that has multiple levels to it. But at the end of the day, thinking about it from me, like just being a competitive person, not even from like a Call of Duty perspective, like there's if you want to take the easy way out of something, like if you're playing one-on-one in basketball, do you want to play somebody who's going to push you to get better, or do you want to just play someone who's an easy win and take your win? Like, I don't know, that wasn't a great example, but
Well,
there's multiple ways you can look at it. And at the end of the day, like you were talking about that Omid Brooklyn team, like if they're the best team in NA Challengers, and you have an option to scrim them or scrim the Vegas Falcon team that hasn't won a hard point yet against the CDL team, which team do you think you're going to get better practice against? I think you have to say you're going to get better practice against that Omid Brooklyn team. And it shouldn't matter at that point whether it's a CDL team versus a Challengers team. Like, if you think you're going to get more practice, better practice against them, then that should be within your right to practice them. Then on the other hand of that, does the CDL step in and say like CDL teams have to scrim? CDL teams, like,
yeah,
as
that
far
never
as we
happened.
know, there's no like rules around that and everything. Like, this is all you know, on the teams themselves to schedule these scrims and stuff like that. So there's just, this really feels like a, you know, a very, very intricate situation that we don't have all the details for, and we don't know the inner workings of like scheduling scrims and stuff like that. But end of the day, I can see the argument that, you know, the teams should be willing to scrim Vegas for the sake of scrimming another CDL team. I can see that point because, you know, you could make the argument. I know it's a different case for this specific Vegas team, but you could make the argument that there have been other teams that haven't been up to snuff with other CDL teams, and you still scrim them. And, you know, if every team is scrimming every other CDL team, then like every team is scrimming the same against this Vegas team. How much does it really matter if everybody is just scrimming them the same? But at the same time, I do get the argument of like, if you had the option to scrim the top challengers team versus Vegas Falcons, and you think you're going to get better practice against the top challengers team, I have no problem with them saying, yeah, I want to scrim that team. But I do think it's a really messed up situation with multiple levels, and we don't have all the details, so it's really weird.
The CDL forcing the other teams to scrim Vegas would be like the teachers telling you to go play with a weird athletic kid at recess or something. Like, that's, it would be funny. Obviously it's not going to happen, but I would just love to see the press release or like the private memo that they tell players that they have to go scrim Vegas or whatever. But like I cover high school sports for my traditional job, obviously, and like teams get to decide who they play outside of their conference. So they have like basically half of their schedule open. And a lot of teams will purposely schedule the hardest, like best teams in their area or even outside. Like they'll go outside of their area like an hour, 2 hours to go play these teams, knowing full well they will probably just get destroyed by some of these teams. But it's really just trying to get better, trying to see better competition, practice essentially against the best, because it's all about the end of the season. And that's kind of the same thing in the CDL. Obviously, they do need to pick up some number of wins to get to the end of the season so they qualify for champs. But for the most part, when you're a really good team, or you think like, you know, you have a good chance at beating, you know, you have a, you qualifying for champs is not like your biggest priority for a lot of these top level teams. So like they can kind of play around a little bit. And we've talked about that a lot with Atlanta FaZe in the past, where it seems like they're experimenting more toward the end of the season than other teams do. That being said, I think that there is value in scrimming Vegas, but this is coming from someone that is not on the inside, that is not like I know that there is a limited amount of practice time that these teams get because there's only a limited amount of time in the day, and scrims are kind of like in blocks, so you kind of have to pick and choose. You don't basically get the entire day to scrim everybody, but I would imagine that playing a team that is so much worse than you could have benefits, because I would imagine Vegas does things differently than a lot of the other CDL teams because they're not from the NA region. They haven't played at this level a ton. And if you've ever heard like pro COD players say like they would rather play like challengers or like just like top AMs than play like just random strangers like in ranked play or whatever, because random strangers do random shit and they have no idea how to predict it or what to expect from these people. Of course, they're better than these players, but they just don't know what these players are going to do on a given decision. They don't have like a traditional mindset for competitive the same way that pros do, because they're almost like machines. Like they just kind of feed off of each other. So a lot of pros play similarly to each other, and that's not the case for regular people. And I would imagine to an extent, not saying that Vegas are regular people because they are, you know, in the top 1% of competitive Call of Duty players in the world, but I'm sure they play much differently if left to their own devices than, you know, most other CDL teams. So maybe there is a benefit to that, but you know, like I said, I'm not on the inside. I don't know the inner workings of scrim blocks and who should scrim who and what time and all that stuff. So maybe it is just like we have the option of scrimming Vegas, or we have an option of scrimming Omit Brooklyn, and we're just going to take Omit because they're a better team, and you know, we're not going to really scrim Vegas because we always feel like we can get better scrims than them, and that makes sense to me. I don't necessarily feel bad for Vegas. I do think that they are, like you said, like there are teams in the past that are as bad or worse than Vegas. Well, we'll see, I guess, because if Vegas doesn't win, then they are the worst. But you know, there are teams in that same range where they're just horrible. They are not like up to the snuff of a CDL team. But Vegas has the unfortunate circumstance of being an all Saudi team that does not have connections in NA. Like the only connections that I can think of with Vegas is Clay and their coach. Like those are the only guys that have any connection to like current pro players or like top AM players. That is not usually like, it's not going to do it. I don't think. Like I really do think like that's going to hurt them, and it's, they don't have the friends, they don't have the connections that's going to land them the scrims that are going to help them get better, at least in CDL. They could play top challengers teams and I think improve, but I do think that hurts them in the long run.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's and part of this too is the language barrier between the Saudi team and these NA teams has to be a factor as well, in the sense of like we're saying like, you know, going back to that historically bad Paris Legion or Vegas Legion, whatever the team was, like if this happened to them, like Temp would have been all over
Yeah.
Twitter talking shit and it would have been content. But like you could, unless Clay is telling all these guys what's going on, like there's a chance they don't even know what's going on, and being allegedly the team's not wanting to scrim them and stuff. And you could say like this could fuel their fire to be like, okay, let's, you know, some of these pro teams don't respect us. Like we're gonna go play these challengers teams. We're gonna get better, get our reps in, and then you know we want to kick the shit out of these CDL teams and make them go harder. But if they don't even understand the discourse because of the language difference and stuff, like that makes it much harder too. So I don't know. I think it is, you know, again, like you said, the concept of them going up against top challengers teams, and from that perspective, like playing them and trying to improve there, it's not the same as getting to scrim Atlanta Phase and LA Thieves, but like that should be something. I don't think it should necessarily be something that's earned, but it's you know the I don't know. I don't. I'm having a tough time wording that part of it, but I do think that's at least from a middle ground perspective. Like they have the option to scrim challengers teams, and then if it gets to a point where the challengers teams aren't wanting to scrim Vegas, then I think that's a pretty big issue. And I think it was on Zuma saying it on the flank, like again, the language barrier makes this less likely of a scenario, but like if nobody wants to scrim Vegas, what's stopping Vegas from saying screw the GAs? Like we're just gonna run around with, some of these GA guns, GA attachments, and just fry you guys if it's OP stuff.
I will buy Falcons merch if that's the case.
But like that's not like I could see Temp doing that with like if this was happening to them, because like he knows what's happening, knows the trash talk and stuff. I mean, hell, Clay did it in World War II against the era team with like Decimate and Blast and Bevels. When Bevels was still playing, he pulled out one of the semi-auto guns and broke the GA there. So that maybe that's potential, but I think that's less likely too, because there's a potential that this Vegas team doesn't even know like the conversation that's happening around that. But that would be something that's Zuma was like, yeah, just have him pull out shotguns. And then somebody, I think it was Ben was like, the shotguns are banned. He's like, pull out LMGs. The LMGs are actually banned in the CDL rules, that they're not GA'd. And Zuma was like, well, shit. I don't know what they're gonna do. But that is, I mean, playing devil's advocate, if teams don't want to scrim them, there's nothing stopping Falcons from being like, yeah, screw it, let's just break the GAs.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine like even with whatever language barrier there might be, like eventually they're gonna get it. Like they're not stupid, or their coaches and all the people around them know what's going on. But it also would, like, even past like breaking GAs, it would be like, all right, like when do we just give up on this experiment, like where we can't even get like legitimate practice because these people are so disrespected by their peers. Like that would be a conversation, I guess, that would have to be had at some point. But yeah, it's crazy. Like I mean, I'm sure it's happened before. Like there have definitely been teams blacklisted, but a lot of times that is not really made public unless it's like a punishment or like there's some kind of controversy. I really haven't heard about a team being blacklisted for just not being good enough, at least at this level. Like I'm sure that happens in challengers because there could be a great disparity in talent, but generally that's not something that would happen in the CDL. But I don't know. We'll see. Like I don't know if that'll help Vegas or hurt them. I really don't know, because it hasn't worked out great regardless of what's been happening so far this season. But we'll see. The last two teams that we need to talk about before we get out of here is LAG and Boston. We'll leave Boston for the end because they're kind of the darlings of the Ego Chall podcast for the most part.
For you, at least.
Hey, like I'm looping you in regardless.
No.
LAG has disappointed pretty big so far this season. I don't think they make a roster move. It would seem like, at least for now, like the mid-season point is usually the time that teams are like, okay, like we need to start making moves now, or it's going to go off the rails really quickly. It's a little surprising that they're this far down in the rankings, that they're so, I wouldn't even say so bad, because they've had really close calls, but maybe I'm being too kind because I wasn't very kind with Cloud9. But LAG, I just didn't expect them to be like, I think they're in second to last in the standings at this moment, and they really haven't shown anything to say that they're like a top 6 team. Like it looks like they might, with a few results, here or there, like around going to their favor, maybe they're up to like 9th or something, or maybe 8th. But it's been pretty bad. What do you think the outlook is for LAG at the moment, considering how poorly the start of the season has gone for them?
Yeah, I think this is one where I also agree. I don't think they're gonna make a move right now. If again you told me they're gonna make a roster move, I wouldn't be surprised. I just think they're kind of like Cloud9 in the boat. They put Major One and the Major One qualifiers in the rearview mirror. Try to see what they can do in these Major Two qualifiers and Major Two, and then if something doesn't work, they make a move at the halfway point. I think they're gonna give it another shot. But for me, it is a little more clear. With this Gentlemate squad, if they were to make a roster move, I think it would be to try and make a move at the AR position. Um, Potentially the flex, depending on what you consider Priesta. But I think that's like, looking at just the stats that Breaking Point posted, like the cards of their stats, which includes all of the Major One, I believe. Uh, Skies and Priesta were both like the worst statistically performing players on the team, whereas Kismet and Lins were playing better. And I think, especially at Major One, I thought Kismet played pretty well despite there being a small sample size there with just that one match in the loser bracket. And I thought at points in the Major One qualifiers online, I was impressed with Lynn's, because I know we had that narrative and that discussion multiple times of like Lynn's quote unquote filling the shoes of Hydra on that former New York Subliners roster, and how hard it would be to live up to that. But I thought Lynn's did have some strong performances. So I think if Gentlemates were to make a move here, it would be potentially at the AR position, replacing either Skies or Priesta. I just don't know. Again, I know I've talked about it multiple times now. Like this whole the concept of having these maps like Hacienda Control and Skyline Hardpoint, where you can have more than two subs on the map. That feeds into being a positive for Priesta, who we know is very flexible and can use multiple guns. So that might be a point against replacing Priesta with somebody who's just more of a natural AR and isn't as flexible. So I don't know. I mean, obviously the name people are talking about is Lunars, from just, he's been apparently the best AR and the best NA Challengers team. So that's just the name that's going to be at the top of everyone's mind right now. I don't know how much that move really moved the needle for this Gentlemate squad though. So we'll have to see. I mean, you could have a guy like Fellow come in because he's playing well in Challengers too. But like, how much does that really change things for this team? I don't know. So that's why I don't think Gentlemates makes a move right at this moment. I just put Major One and Major One qualifiers in the rearview mirror and move on, because I mean they played pretty well, all things considered, at Major One. Like they beat OpTic in two hard points, which again we've talked about the hard point situation for OpTic multiple times now. But 99 Kids went 32-19 in a 250 to 110 win map one for LAG against OpTic. And then they had another 70-point win on Skyline Hardpoint, which I talked about. And the first S&D they lost was a 6-5, so that was close. It was just the 3-0 in the control wasn't close. And the game 5 was a 6-2 on Vault S&D. LAG went up 2-0, and then OpTic just won 6 rounds straight after that. So small sample size at the major itself, and just a lackluster performance from this squad in the qualifiers. But I think if you told me they're making a move, I wouldn't be super surprised. I just don't see it happening right this second. I think they go in with the same roster, Major 2 qualifiers, try and make something happen, and then if things don't work out, then they would be on my list to definitely make a move if they struggle again after Major 2.
They're interesting because 4 of their 7 losses have been in Game 5, and that's pretty tough. They also have a better map win percentage than both C9 and Vancouver, who are ahead of them in the standings, partially because they're going to Game 5 and losing instead of winning. I don't know. Like, I think it's pretty obvious that Priesta is the first man out. Like, we know what 2 of these guys look like together without Priesta. Like, I think that is a big key in roster changes. Like, have we seen them without each other? And we've seen Skies and Kismet together without Priesta, and the results were pretty good. I think Priesta is just like, he's just going to be the scapegoat. Like, his stats aren't going to hold up in comparison to his teammates, and that often is, the first guy cut. We just saw it with Hicksy. Like, not saying that Hicksy was like the best player or anything, but when you have the worst stats, like typically that's going to be the guy that gets the boot first. So I think Priesta will be the first one out when they do make a roster change. I do think they will eventually. It just seems impossible that this team goes the entire season without making a change. So,
Yeah,
whenever they do make a change, it's going to be probably Priesta. It's probably going to be somebody who has like a pretty good tracker with the S&D, because right now that's
really?
yeah, maybe. It would be interesting at least, because I took out their Vegas result because that was one of their only wins, and I just don't think like there's any point to consider Vegas in this equation. But every other match that they played in the CDL so far counts. They're 6-9 in hardpoint, not great. 3-9 in S&D, and 5-3 in control. So they're the best at the one game mode that means the least, which isn't great. But just even if they got up to like 6-9 in S&D, that's probably like, I mean, that would literally be 3 of their 4 game 5 losses at least. So I don't know, like that. It just, I want to root for these guys because I think this is a really talented roster, all things considered. But they're gonna have to prove it. They're gonna have to show it. Linz has also shown like flashes of being like a really good player. So I don't think he's going to be like, he's just not going to be part of these roster changes if it happens, unless this team just completely tanks and then they just have to make whatever moves come to them. But I think Priest is first out. Like you said, Skies might be an option because those have been statistically the worst players. And I'm just not going to drop 99 Kiz. Like, I've seen him at his best. So, like, there's just no way that you can move off of him unless he just completely is a shell of himself from what we've seen. Like, where he's literally, like, I mean, I've seen him and he's literally at times been the best player, like, with literally all of these all-stars. He's been the best player in the lobby. So I think Kiz stays. I think Lynn stays. It comes down to Priest and Skies. I would lean toward Priesta, but, like we said, a roster change probably not coming before major 2 qualifiers start. Maybe if they don't perform well during the qualifiers or after the minor or something, maybe at that point they decide to pull the trigger.
One player real quick that I hadn't thought about until we were talking about the Linz thing, and it just came to my mind, so I looked it up to make sure he actually is French. According to his COD Gamepedia page, he is. Cobra. Cobra is an AR player who I feel like has been in conversations in the past couple of off seasons and hasn't actually gotten a CDL chance. He's played with Linz, Abuza, and I think Brezzi before. So there's something there. If things aren't going well for this Gentlemate squad with that fan support and like the co-stream and everything they have, they get another French player in there. They have Linz and Cobra as a sub and an AR player. And then they look for 2 beyond that. Like that could be the building blocks of something there. And that's something we talked about dating back all the way to the Paris Legion, right? Like if you're not going to be one of the teams, one of the teams competing for championships, you can build that like fan base and stuff, which very clearly the Gentlemates have in that French community and whatnot. So that's a name to look at too. I don't know how Cobra's doing in challengers this year or anything like that, but I know that's been a name that's been thrown around before. Could be something to keep an eye on there too.
Last but not least, we have the Boston Breach. I mean, it's kind of sucks because we ended on like kind of a down note for what this stage was for them, because I don't know if they had been in the winners bracket of a major in like 2 years, but they started in the winners bracket of major 1 and it didn't go great, to say the least. They get double first rounded. They finish with the top 12 finish. Not ideal, but I still don't think they should make a change. I think everything, like, if you just took it in its totality, what they did in stage 1, say you win 5 matches, you finish top 12. I don't think that's like out of the ordinary for Boston. They'd be like, 5 matches? Really? Like 5? I think that's probably what they should go and look at. Like, it's not how you finished. It's just everything that you did in that first stage. You beat OpTic, they're the only team to beat OpTic in the online qualifiers. Granted, Atlanta really did not did not entertain them at all. Atlanta was like the one team that was like, yeah, you guys are not on our level. But everybody else, basically, Boston was right there with them until the major, obviously. And I don't know. I just think, and obviously they went to Game 5 at the major, so that happens. That they were in a lot of Game 5s. It's gonna happen that you're gonna lose them. You hope that you lose them in the qualifiers more so than the actual major, ideally. But do you agree with me that you just kind of take it and just hope that you can improve a little bit, or just continue to do what you did in Major 2 or the Stage 2 stuff? Because if they win another 5 matches, like, they're right on pace to make champs, which is pretty incredible for where Boston was a year ago.
That's where Boston was 6-27 last year. So the 5 matches, if
One
they
more,
won
baby.
one match at the major, they would have as many wins as Boston did all of last year. So yes, I don't think Boston makes a change. I think the other important element to Boston specifically is there were those reports um, earlier in the offseason that the organization would potentially be looking to leave Call of Duty esports, and that at least has to be factored into any potential like discussions around roster changes and stuff. If the org was potentially looking to move on, it's very possible that they aren't going to be super thrilled about spending more money and potentially signing another player and all that stuff. So I don't think Boston makes a move. I think they come in and try to replicate what they did in the Major 1 qualifiers, and just, I've said this a couple times now, put Major 1 in the rearview mirror for them. I will, kind of joking before we got to this, but, I definitely was on the side of things last year, the slasher side of things, and the whole slasher versus Snoopy thing. And even this year in the slasher versus Snoopy first round matchup, I was siding with slasher, but Snoopy definitely has shown signs of improvement this year. I don't think that can be denied by anybody. Um, so it is going to be interesting if they, are okay with keeping this roster if it potentially hinders his development. You know what I mean? Like, if there's another young player out there that Boston sees and potentially thinks we can pair him with Snoopy, and maybe that's another duo that we can build around moving forward. How does that factor into any potential financial decisions and whatnot? That's something to keep an eye on there. I think looking at the stats, I'm pretty sure Cammy was the worst performing player on the team, and if I had to guess, he's probably uh, the oldest player on the team. I don't think that's unless Awakening is just older than I'm thinking. I'm pretty sure that's safe to say. So it's possible if Boston were to make a move, they also look for an upgrade in the AR department, maybe with a younger player from challengers. But I think end of the day right now, yeah, I'd be surprised if Boston made a move right now. If they start to slip back into this former 2024 territory of just becoming a team that loses consistently, then I think the conversation shifts a little bit. But I think right now, they try to run it back with this roster and see what they get in the upcoming qualifiers, because obviously things worked out in the Major 1 qualifiers, just not at Major 1 itself.
And they have also had a pretty tough schedule, all things considered. Um, their last 5 matches, of course, they lost to C9. That's a bad loss. But they played Atlanta twice. They played LAT and Carolina. That's their last 5. If you go back to their last 6, OpTic is included in that. They obviously played OpTic twice so far this season. FaZe twice. It's a tough road, I guess. They kind of got an unlucky draw in the winners bracket, especially to play FaZe, like, because FaZe looked like incredible heading in, and to play them and be like the higher seed out of those two, and it's bad luck for them.
All I'll say is things don't get easier overall for Boston in these Major 2 qualifiers, but their first 2 qualifier matches on February 14th, they play Vegas. February 15th, they play Gentlemates. So if Boston isn't 2-0 after the first week of Major 2 qualifiers, then I think we can potentially talk about maybe they have to decide if they want to make a roster change. After that, they play. Why is it they have to
Yeah, they
have a
play
long break here? So
Toronto. They play
Toronto,
C9.
Yeah.
LAT, Atlanta, and Miami in the
Yeah.
Major 2 qualifiers. I mean, we'll see what happens, but yeah, like you said, they should start 2-0. Like with how all three of those teams have played, Vegas, LAG, and Boston. Boston should win both of those matches. Who knows what C9 will show up? So like that's the saving grace there. And then who knows what Miami will show up? I think it's pretty like we should probably think that LAT, Atlanta, and Toronto will beat them. Although Boston has beaten LAT online as well. I think the Atlanta one is probably like the most secure because Atlanta's 6-0 in map count
Yeah.
against Boston. But yeah, like they're more likely to start in the losers bracket of Major 2. Granted, we'll see what happens with the minor. Like it doesn't have anything to do with Major 2 qualifying and stuff, but it could help them in the long run. They didn't have a great performance in minor 1, so we'll see what happens. But yeah, Boston is they're an interesting case study of just how long can they go without making a roster change, and honestly being okay with that. Like I'm okay with them sticking right now, but
Yeah.
it's right now. Like we might have a different opinion once we get to Major 2.
Yep.
But yeah, that about does it. We're about an hour and a half in. The Super Bowl starts in like an hour and a half, 2 hours. We hope that you guys have a great Super Bowl Sunday, a safe one at the very least. We're coming in on Major 2 qualifiers. Obviously, we will talk about the first week of qualifiers on the next episode, which will be on Wednesday or Thursday if you're just listening or watching after the fact. But yeah, I think that about does it. We're about an hour and a half in. Make sure to like, subscribe, or follow the podcast feed wherever you're listening or watching on. Make sure to give us a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts. I don't think I've mentioned that in a while, but we're on Apple Podcasts. We're on Spotify, Amazon Music, and of course YouTube. We're at like 204, 205 subscribers on YouTube the last time I saw. 207. There you go. So yeah, we're trying to get to 300 by the end of the CDL season. So we got a few months, but we're 93 away at this point. Follow us on Twitter at jbink with 2Ks, at Preston Byers. The podcast Twitter's at Ego Chall Podcast. And you can also follow Bink on Twitch, twitch.tv/jbink with 2Ks. That's JBINKK. And you can catch he's going into month 2 of the race. I believe he's dubbing it, but I don't know how much of a race it is anymore. I think he's like way ahead in the race, but yeah, but it's he's doing pretty well. So this is like day 33, 34.
It'll be day 32 today. I'll go live after Super Bowl.
All right, so day 32. By the time you guys probably listen to this, it'll be 33 or 34. So make sure to tune in on Twitch and give him a follow. And our next show will be probably Wednesday, February 12th. The time will kind of depend. I'm back to work, so really it'll probably be a later show than we've been doing more recently. But we appreciate you guys tuning in. The people that come by and watch the live stream on Twitch and on YouTube, we really appreciate that. And if you're a podcast listener or a podcast viewer, if you're on YouTube, we appreciate that as well. And I believe actually you can view it on Spotify. I don't know if a single soul does that, to be honest, but I do believe it is available for viewing on Spotify. But we appreciate you nonetheless, however you're listening or watching. But we'll be back on Wednesday. We'll be doing some power rankings and tier lists, power rankings, whatever we call them. But we're going to go through and talk about the teams. Obviously, we've discussed each of these teams more at length, but we're going to try to condense it, try to see where these teams rank in relation to each other after seeing now online and on LAN performances. So we'll talk about that, probably some other stuff. If any roster mania news, of course, pops up, we'll see what happens with Vancouver officially. But we'll talk about any of that on the Wednesday's live show. And yeah, that does it for me. Bink, take it away.
Yeah, thank you guys as always for all the support. I've talked enough for today, so I'm not going to ramble on anymore. We'll see you back here ahead of the Major 2 qualifiers starting up on Friday, February 14th, which I believe is Valentine's Day, if I'm not mistaken.
That is correct.
So make sure you get your significant others, or if you don't have a significant other, maybe you can get something nice for your mom. Um, but yeah, I've yapped enough. Thank you guys as always for all the support. We'll see you back here soon, and remember to send the chow.